So some of the worst picks for me was, when Larry drafted Tyrell Williams. That was very much a confusing pick. But other than that, I think Larry's picks all made sense early on in the draft. As far as other people, that they had some picks that really didn't make any sense earlier in the draft. And I'm going to go through a few of those right now. I really think the worst of the early picks, there was a pair of them that Brendan made that really didn't make any sense to me. Whether that was him drafting out of a magazine or just drafting, based on, pure, I don't know, just pulling names out of the air. Both of these picks didn't make any sense. The first one of these was in the round 4, the second round of the actual draft with Eli Manning. And it's nothing against Manning. I actually think he's going to be a decent QB1 this year. But he was the third quarterback off the entire draft board. The entire draft board. I didn't get it. Brendan easily could have taken Eli Manning, like 4, I would say probably around here, 4 or 5 rounds later, and had more quality draft picks earlier on in the draft. It didn't make any sense to me. And then the other one, this was a really big one, Tyler Eifert the following round. Eifert, who the heck knows when Eifert's going to play? His injury is a big issue. Brendan already had a tight end. He kept Gronkowski, so there was no reason, unless you're trying to play the James strategy of 2 tight ends, which I'm going to get to in a little bit. Unless you're trying to play that strategy, there was no reason for Brendan to take a second tight end before he took a single running back. I get there seemed to be, and this is something we'll get to touch on later, a lot of people buying into the waiting on running backs thing, which is kind of a new, I guess, strategy of sorts in fantasy this year. I didn't understand, though, the Tyler Eifert pick. That just boggled my mind. So that's kind of my whole stance on Brendan. There were a few other picks, a few other people that had some head-scratching moves. I guess I'll touch on James now. I really didn't think he picked too far out of the box. I think the thing that really confused me about James's strategy, if you look here, kept Eddie Lacy, which, made sense to an extent. He's kind of an act keeper sort of tier, but not really. However, after this, and he also prepped Brandon Cooks, he started quarterback, tight end, and then went wide receiver, quarterback, and then waited all the way down to 10 here to take Tevin Coleman as his second running back. That is going to burn him. And you'll see my predictions in a little bit. That is going to burn James down the road. I don't see – it's going to take a lot of different things happening for James to have any success at running back. Now, with that said, the whole Atlanta running back situation, Devontae Freeman stunk in the last month of last season. If that carries over into 2016, it's not out of the realm of possibility Coleman ends up getting working his way into a starting role for Atlanta at some point in the season. But, to count on some of these guys picking up the slack, New England, who the hell knows what their running back situation is ever going to be like. You can't, Jarek McKinnon's not going to get anything other than third down play unless Adrian Peterson gets hurt. And, down here, James already cut Chris Johnson, and, Reggie Bush is, again, a backup at this point, at this age. How much can he do? James doesn't have much of anything at running back, and I understand kind of the strategy he was going for. He's got Aaron Rodgers, the quarterback. He's got 2 of the top 3 tight ends, in my opinion. But I don't think that's going to make up for the lack of talent at running back. It just doesn't make any sense to me. So that was another confusing thing. I had. The only other complaint I had is I really think he reached for Sterling Shepard, but it's kind of hard for a rookie. It's kind of hard to say whether when you draft them, if it was too early or too late or whatnot. I don't. Only time will tell whether that Shepard pick was good or not. A couple other picks that really caught my eye. I didn't quite get Jonathan Stewart, with John taking Jonathan Stewart here in the second round of the draft. And maybe it's just my personal opinion on Jonathan Stewart, but he's not. He was really a product of that Carolina team that I really felt played a very easy schedule last year against some defenses that couldn't stop the run. Carolina's going to regress this year. Most people agree on that. And I don't think Stewart's injury prone. He's never been more or better than a running RB2. John already had Adrian Peterson, Lamar Miller. So on one hand, Stewart doesn't have to do a whole lot. On the other hand, John probably could have snatched up another wide receiver there. And I think, it's good. It may hurt. He may be hurt a little bit at wide receiver this season, seeing that you go all the way down to Devontae Parker as his fourth wideout. Devontae Parker is not that. The news coming out of Miami camp is not great regarding Devontae Parker. It's a guy with a lot of talent, but I've always thought his work ethic has been a bit of an issue. He's injury prone. He's very injury prone, actually, even though he's only in his second year. That could be a bit of it could hurt that team's depth at that position. I don't think it was so wise for John to take Stewart. I think he reached a little bit, and I think he should have gone with a wide receiver in that spot. Another puzzling one, I really like Monique's draft, and you're going to see what I like about her team a little bit later on. I do, however, I don't think Melvin Gordon was the guy to go with as a second running back. He was awful last year. And there's a lot of people that say, his values, he's underrated this year because he was so bad last year that, a lot of people think he's going to bounce back. I mean, I'm not too sure. And it's hard to say this because Jeremy Langford hasn't had great reviews either. I would much rather have gone with Langford over Gordon in this spot, or even a guy like Charles Sims. At least go with somebody who has a little bit more upside. I think Sims has more upside, even though he's not presumably going to be a starter to start the year. Melvin Gordon would make me nervous as a second running back. And behind him, if there's a weak spot on their team, it is that running back. She only has Darren Sproles, who's a good pass catcher, but a part-timer. Alfred Morris, who that's really just a handcuff pick to Ezekiel Elliott that she made. And Andre Ellington, who, is probably going to be limited, barring any injuries, limited to passing downs. So I wasn't thrilled with the Melvin Gordon selection by Monique, but I do like a lot of her other picks, which we'll get to in a little bit. And the only other pick that really stood out to me in terms of position players was Chris Burthwaite with Jeremy Hill. And I know during the draft he made a comment 3 picks before Hill went, I took Gio Bernard. And he made a comment, I know, Chris, that I took the backup running back for Cincinnati. I took the running back that's actually going to catch passes and as well as pick up some rushing yards. And in my opinion, it's probably going to be even if Gio Bernard is not the quote-unquote starting running back, he's probably going to get more points than Jeremy Hill. I'm not a Jeremy Hill fan. He's not a liability in the passing game. He's not exactly the fastest running back in the world. And this is another case kind of similar to John where Chris had an opportunity to probably take a better third wideout than a third running back in that spot. And honestly, taking Hill, I would have rather him taking Ryan Matthews, I think would have been a better pick for Chris. Matthews went with the next pick to Brendan. I think Ryan Matthews would have been a better pick than Jeremy Hill in that spot. And then the one last final pick that I didn't like, not a position player, but this is going to be my normal rant. And I'm not just as a disclaimer, I'm not a guy who frowns on taking defenses before the end of the draft. My whole strategy every year, ever since I've ever played fantasy, has been you take 2 defenses, you play the matchups with those 2 defenses each week. I always have believed you have a better shot of getting a legit top 3, top 5 defense by drafting one earlier than playing the waiver wire. With that said, Joe taking the Broncos defense when he did, that is way too early. That's about 5 rounds too early. And it's interesting when people do this, and this happens in our league every year. Defense goes way too early, and then you have Seattle's defense went in 11th way too early. Panther defense, 12th round, way too early, picked by John. I don't know what Brendan was thinking to Giants defense. That they shouldn't have even gone in the draft. Cardinals defense taken by Rob 13th round, way too early in my opinion. It did start around. I took the Texans defense way too early. It's interesting. It does kind of, once a team takes defenses early, it kind of pushes everybody else too. And for the teams that do wait on defenses, it does put them in a bit of more of an advantage. Similar like Glenn always waits, Larry, and actually those two are typically the only ones that really wait very, very, very late. There's some people like Steve and Mo that waited pretty late as well. Those teams get a bit more of an advantage in terms of having more depth at the positions. And lastly, I'm also going to touch on that with kickers. I'm actually open to taking a kicker before the final round in fantasy. However, in this league, kickers go way earlier than I would ever take them. Gostkowski, Hauschka, Tucker all went in round 13, and I'm going to say that's about at least 4 rounds too early. I think no kicker should go before this spot, the 17th round, and even there, I think I'd only take Gostkowski. We had 5 kickers go before that spot. Everybody else waited until the 18th, which is fine, but way too early for the kickers here. So let's go through team by team now, and we're going to see who I think. I'm going to go actually in reverse order of what I think is going to be expected record here, and of my predicted record. It's going to go worst to first. No, my team is not going to be worst. So we're going to go with the team I think is going to be dead last this year. And this may probably be a surprise to most people, but I'll explain why this team came out dead last. So Team Jersey Devils, owned by John Davis, I have them going 2-11 this year. And everybody's probably screaming right now thinking, what are you thinking, 2-11? A lot of that actually doesn't have to do with the actual team. I think a lot of it is actually going to be schedule. So I actually factor strength of schedule into how I do my predictions, and I use Football Guys. If you ever go through their rate my team process, they do rate how strong your team's going to be in a given week. And what I've discovered is that on paper, the key word is on paper here, John's actually going to play a lot of teams that are going to have very, very good lineup the week they play them. It's just luck of the draw. On paper, it looks like John may have one of those really hard luck, difficult, really rough seasons. It's just the way sometimes the schedule turns out. Now, as far as his team's concerned, very old school team, Adrian Peterson, Lamar Miller, outstanding running back duo. After that, however, he has a strong defense and kicker. He decided to go early at his positions. I don't like his wide receivers. Depending on Mike Evans as your top wide receiver is not exactly the greatest plan in the world. We saw, I believe Justine tried that last year. It didn't work out. She managed to get Allen Robinson later in the draft, but she didn't. She was weak at wide receiver. John taking a similar strategy to what Justine had last year. And in today's NFL and today's fantasy football, it's just not running back oriented. It's wide receiver. I think John's going to be behind. He's going to be trailing the lead when it comes to receptions, reception yards, and just pure yardage through the passing game. Losing Aaron Rodgers really hurt John. He ended up waiting on a quarterback. He's got Phillip Rivers and Derek Carr, which he probably between the two of them will be able to split, the time up 50-50. But it's just outside of running back in the minor defense and kicker positions, there's not a ton of I do think he's going to be middle of the pack in terms of points scored. I'm predicting a 2-11 record because the schedule looks brutal for him, and that's strictly it. If it turns out his schedule isn't brutal, he'll probably be in the hunt for a wild card spot. But without better wide receivers, John's going to just be lagging behind some other more passing game oriented teams in the league this year. I'm going to go with the 2-11 record just because on paper, as I said, on paper, his schedule looks difficult. I'm not a fan of how he built his team, and I think it's going to be one of those seasons where he's going to probably lose a lot of close games, a lot of high-scoring games. So I got John with the worst record of 2-11. We'll go down 11th place now. We're going with the newly named name came up during the actual in-person draft for people who were there. 2 tight end sets owned by James. This is kind of a testament to me not liking the sort of out of the box strategy that James is going with, and I will be very nice and polite about it. I do think James's strategy is it's unique, and I think it has a chance to work. I do think he's going with something that other teams aren't doing. He went ahead and said he's going to go full strength at quarterback and tight end. And it's a unique strategy. It's something that's not typically preached by most fantasy players, most fantasy quote-unquote experts. But it's different. I don't see it working, unfortunately. Well, for one, some of the lineups he has set here, I don't understand. I'm assuming this is going to change. He sat almost all his good players here. But he's got Aaron Rodgers. I mean, enough said there. Aaron Rodgers, quarterback. He's going to have Tom Brady once Brady's back from suspension. So quarterback, he's set. I'm assuming Jordan Reed and Greg Olsen are going to be a 1-2 tight end punch with one playing tight end, one playing the flex most weeks. I like that. That's fine. After that, there's not a lot to like. There's no depth on this team at running back or wide receiver whatsoever. You got Eddie Lacy at running. He's probably the only full-time starting running back on this team, at least to start the year. That's a bad sign right out of the gate. That is a very bad sign. You can even see the week 1 projections are up. You can see how much he's lagging behind at running back. I mean, he's likely going to have to play. He's going to have to play James White or Tevin Coleman in that second running back spot the first week. That's not. Those aren't guys you want starting at running back. Wide receiver, Brandon Cooks is there. Marvin Jones, I think, is going to be an okay receiver to start. After that, there's a lot of unknowns. He decided to take flyers on a couple rookies, Sterling Shepard, Will Fuller. Kevin White's basically a rookie. He missed his entire rookie year. I mean, you're going to need one of those 3 guys to emerge as a starter, and there's no guarantee that any of those 3 guys are going to be good enough to do that. It's just that simple. So as far as James is concerned, I don't like the team. I don't like the strategy. I give him credit for trying something new, trying something different. And hey, if it works at the end of the day, we're all going to be kind of apologetic to dissing him for building his team the way it is. However, this is a very much a boom bust strategy. Either James is going to, it's going to work. James will end up in the playoffs, back in the playoffs for the first time in 3 years, and he's going to look like a pretty smart guy, or it's just going to completely blow up in his face, and it's going to be a very long season and potentially historically bad season. I'm going to go with the latter. I think James is going to finish 3-10. I do think the Central Division is going to be tough this year, and that's not going to help matters at all. You can't be this weak at running back and wide receiver. I just don't see how the strategy is going to work. So we're moving on. Those are the 2 teams, John and James, I think are going to be very bad. The other 10 teams, everybody else I think is going to be somewhat in contention. So now we're going to go to the next team on my list. I have a 5-8 prediction for this team, and it's going to be Justine's team. I make his couch pull out. as I said, James and John, I think, are going to be the two really rough teams this year. Justine, I have at 5-8. This franchise has had one winning season, never been to the playoffs. It's kind of there's been good teams with this franchise. Justine's had a couple of good teams, but just it's a matter of luck. Things never work out well. As far as the way this team's built, I like some of the pieces. I like the Doug Martin pick with the third overall pick. It gives her, once Le'Veon Bell gets back, she's going to be pretty strong at running back, I think. Having Jeremy Langford, Jay Ajayi as backups, Devontae Booker, I think was a nice pick. Spencer Ware, I think, could really work out well for her. She's pretty good at running back. Wide receiver, not too bad. I like Allen Robinson, obviously, her top wide as a keeper. Doug Baldwin looks like a nice pick. It's a little iffy after the fact. After Baldwin, Kelvin Benjamin, we don't know how he's going to turn out the year after missing a season due to injury. We don't know how Alan Hearns is number 2 wide out in Jacksonville. I think the thing I didn't like most about Justine's team is she really went all in with the Jaguars passing game. I mean, she's got Robinson, she's got Hearns, and Blake Bortles is her quarterback. He's the only quarterback on the roster. That would make me a little bit nervous because everybody's saying, "Oh, this is the Jaguars' year." The passing game did put up their offense did put up a lot of yards and touchdowns in the passing last year, mostly because the team was losing a lot of games by a lot again last year. Jacksonville, I'm not convinced Bortles is a great quarterback. I did not have him high on my quarterback rankings. If Jacksonville completely falls apart, there's a decent chance they might, you got to realize that this team's going to fall flat on its face if Jacksonville's passing game falls apart. Whether that will happen or not, we've got to see. But I'm a little nervous about that fact. And if Jacksonville's passing game does fall apart, Justine doesn't have another quarterback to fall back on. And her depth at wide receiver is a little limited. Tight end, she decided to wait, took Jason Witten as her starter. She has nobody behind him. I mean, Austin Seferian-Jenkins really hasn't done anything in his few years in the league. There's this is another sort of old school team. She built it similar to John, but not as running back heavy. However, there is depth lacking at wide receiver. I'm going with the prediction that she's going to be inconsistent. Her point values are going to vary wildly week to week, especially relying on so many Jacksonville players. That's why I'm going with the 5-8 record. She still plays in the North, which, believe it or not, I think is going to really weaken this year. I didn't like the way a lot of people in the North drafted. However, she's still. This is the type of team without Le'Veon Bell for a few weeks. I think she's going to get off to another slow start like she has in past years. Maybe turn it on mid-season, late in the year, but it's going to be too little, too late. We'll go with a 5-8 record for Justine. Continuing on, another team I have finishing 5-8, ironically enough, is Justine's husband, Larry. My couch pulls out, but I don't. And you can say this is a very interesting move. Larry has made the playoffs 5 years in a row. Most of his teams have been pretty good. Never has had really a great team, but all of his teams have been pretty good. I will tell you, I don't think he drafted poorly. What's really going to hurt Larry is really his keepers, which I was surprised Larry didn't consider. I think he considered making a trade in the offseason, but he didn't make a move. And I think not having any true franchise, workhorses is going to hurt him. Jamal Charles, things are not looking good for him. There's been a lot of negative reports about him, not starting out like 8 to start the season. You can click on this right here. The latest ones, he may not be ready. Here's a new one from yesterday. Charles may not be ready to play for week 1. And apparently they're going to use a running back by committee approach. And that's not good because after Jamal Charles, Larry only has really one other full-time running back, and that's a pretty old Matt Forte. Danny Woodhead isn't going to run a lot. I like him as a PPR guy, but he's not going to pick up rushing yards. Isaiah Crowell is a backup. Shane Vereen's another Danny Woodhead type passing down guy. A lot of receptions. There's not a lot to like at running back, and losing Jamal Charles, unless Matt Forte continues to produce like he has in the past at an age of, I think, Forte's at 30 or 31, Larry's going to be lagging behind at running back. I also am nervous about Dez Bryant, more so because of the whole quarterback situation in Dallas. Nobody knows how Dak Prescott's going to turn out. Odds are they're not going to be throwing the ball a lot. It's going to hurt Dez Bryant's production. And behind him, Larry just doesn't have a whole lot of firepower. He has some pretty good middle-of-the-pack guys, Jarvis Landry, Eric Decker. I think he has depth there at wide receiver with Willie Snead as a fourth guy. He has a lot of wide receivers on his bench. There's a little bit of depth there, but there's no good, strong franchise guys to lean on. And that kind of goes to quarterback, tight end, all across the board. There's nobody out there that you could look at and point to and say that this guy's going to carry Larry's team. I don't see his team just having a ton of explosive performances that can put his point totals up over the top in a high-scoring game against some of the other teams in this league. It's just a team that screams mediocrity all over it. So I have Larry finishing 5-8 and missing the playoffs for the first time since actually Larry has made the playoffs since he rejoined the league in 2011. He's made the playoffs every year. So if he misses the playoffs, it would be the first time since 2009, which is for Larry and I, our junior year of college. It's been a long time since Larry's missed the playoffs in this league, but I think this will be the year that it will happen. Continuing on, now we got a bunch of 6 and 7 teams, one of which I think will get a wild card spot. I only have 5 teams finishing with a winning record, so I do have one of these 6 and 7 teams making the playoffs. Team Viper, owned by Joe, will not make the playoffs. They are not one of my picks here. I have them losing out on tiebreakers. Some of you may be surprised, expecting to see this team a little lower. I think this team actually rated. I don't like the team. However, they are kind of the opposite of John. I have them playing a very easy schedule this year. So I do think that they are going to probably luck their way into a few wins. I see them kind of hanging around, being that team that doesn't score a ton of points but has a decent record, hangs around till the end, but falls short of a playoff spot. See, this team, I actually like their wide receiver group. I think they did a good job going after Jeffrey and Macklin early in the draft. I do like Drew Brees still as a quarterback, as a starting quarterback. I think he's a good buy low opportunity. It's a strong receiving core, but there's a lot of people that forego running backs in this league this year, and Joe seems like one of them. Now I know he said he's convinced DeMarco Murray has the chance to put up big numbers still. I'm not so sure. I think it's a wait and see approach. I think Murray has the chance to put up big numbers, but if Derrick Henry, the rookie over in Tennessee, runs well, Joe's going to be in trouble. Murray's not going to play a whole lot. Behind him, you got Arian Foster, who, everybody knows what Foster's going to bring to you. He has a chance to put up big points if he's healthy. Odds are he's going to get hurt at some point early in the year. Amir Abdullah, I don't like. I had him last year. He was just a disaster. Just fundamental things. Abdullah, apparently, he said, I read this yesterday, apparently he thinks he's going to be the feature back. But I don't think that's going to happen. The Lions are going to go with a committee approach, no doubt about it. And behind him, I mean, there's a lot of injured running backs here. You got Deion Lewis, who's going to be injured for, I believe, the first half of the season. And Darren McFadden, who is injured for, I believe is going to be injured for who knows how long. I don't even know. Let's see if I can get this to jump in. Come up. I'm having some computer issues right now.
There you go, Mike. Yeah. So I don't like his running backs. I think that's going to hurt. I mean, if Drew Brees has a bad season, he doesn't have another quarterback to rely on. And I'm not a fan of, as I mentioned earlier in the show, about taking a defense and kicker too early. So I got Joe going 6-7 this season. We'll see how it goes, but I don't see his team, being able to put up the big points to put up wins on a weekly basis. Continuing on, the last team the last team I see missing the playoffs and finishing 6-7 is Brendan's team, aptly named after a certain presidential candidate. Some people may be surprised about this team too, because I did not like the way Brendan drafted. But like Joe, I think he's going to have a pretty easy schedule. And I do have him finishing in second place in the North and ahead of both Larry and Justine. And I'll tell you why. This guy, Antonio Brown and Rob Gronkowski. Brendan drafted very poorly. However, he had two really good keepers, and that is going to give him a huge advantage moving into the season, regardless of how he drafted. Now, Brendan's biggest problem, what's going to keep him, I think, out of the playoffs and from contending, is that he doesn't have depth. Running backs don't look great. Matt Jones is a question mark to start the season. Ryan Matthews is very questionable as a starting running back. Chris Ivory, playing in Jacksonville, same exact thing. Behind Brown, I like T.Y. Hilton. I don't like any of his other wide receivers. Now, I don't like Torrey Smith. Don't like Dorial Green Beckham, especially with the Sam Bradford trade earlier today. There's just a lot of issues there. I'm okay with the quarterbacks. I think he's going to be fine at quarterback, but there's a lack of depth. It's almost like a stars and scrubs approach when it comes to Brendan's team. Not exactly the best way to build a winning team. So I'm going to go 6-7 with Brendan. I think his team kind of speaks for itself when you look at. You can kind of just look at it on paper, and it just screams at you like lack of depth. Lack of depth is not something. It's just injuries happen in football. God forbid, Brown and Gronk were to get hurt, this team's sunk. It's completely sunk. I'm going to go middle of the road, 6 and 7. So as I said, I think a 6 and 7 team will get in. According to my predictions, a 6 and 7 team will get in the playoffs, and the 6 and 7 team I have getting in is going to actually be last year's worst team, Monique, and playing a little hardball. I like the way she went about rebuilding this team. This team was kind of left in a really bad spot at the end of last year. The team had no real franchise players to build around. Really bad season. Every move Monique did last year, and even towards the very end of 2014, it was not nice. It's just nothing worked. I love the trade she made with Keenan Allen. I think it made sense. I actually think it made sense for both James and Monique. Win-win for both sides. She kept Demaryius Thomas, which is probably, as her second keeper, probably the only move she could have made. You could have made the argument for Doug Baldwin, but I think Thomas is the better option there. She made the correct pick with the first overall pick. She doesn't have a whole lot to lose with Ezekiel Elliott. He looks very good as a rookie running back, and he's a potential, franchise building block. Makes sense. As far as that wide receiver, I think she's strong with Fitzgerald and the guys she has behind him. You there, James?
Yeah, I'm here. How are you? Sorry
I'm
to.
doing well.
Thank you for the nice compliment about the trade I made with Mo. I appreciate it.
Did you watch any of what I said earlier?
No, I did not, and I'm intrigued to hear what you have to say.
Well, we can, once I finish with Mo, we'll rewind a little bit on your team, because I'm not a huge fan, James, and I'll let you kind of talk about your draft strategy a little bit if you don't mind.
Oh, of course, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'll hang tight, get another beer to numb my pain. It's all soon. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt you, Mike.
Nah, it's okay. The only other thing I was going to say about Mo, I do think the Josh Gordon pick was good for where she took him. I like kind of Pierre Garçon as a depth wide receiver. I do think running back is where she's going to be hurting especially that second running back spot. But this is a team that has just enough that I think can get in the playoffs. So it would be nice to see Mo, finally get over that hump, get in the playoffs in her third season. I think she'll get there. And, once you're in, anything can happen. All right, so I did want to go back. We'll go back since James is here and rewind to his team. As I mentioned, James, I have your team finishing with a really poor record, only because I don't know if you have a whole lot there at running back. So you went really heavy quarterback, tight end, and then wide receiver in the draft. Why'd you wait so long to take running backs? And it looks like James disappeared. All right. So we'll go back to and preview the playoff teams again. I have the number 5 seed Steve Wojciechowski finishing 7 and 6. It's a lot of the same. It's a lot of the same. Same old with Steve, to say the least. His team, it doesn't really, set the world on fire, but neither do a lot of his teams annually. So it's not a whole lot different than when some of the teams Steve's taken in the past. Hold on a sec. Sorry. Okay. As I mentioned, it's not a whole lot different than the teams Steve's taken in the past. The thing that makes me nervous mostly about Woj is, running back. You see there the big, Q's question side. Thomas Rawls, very much. There's question marks at running back. He's not very strong in that department. DeAndre Hopkins is Golden Tate. I think are going to be a good wide receiver duo. Emmanuel Sanders decent for a third wide out. Quarterback Stafford. Quarterback is going to be kind of boom or bust with him with Stafford, Fitzpatrick, Cutler. As I said, this team doesn't set the world on fire, but it's good. It's good enough. I think running back is going to be the big issue, though he does have enough depth to hold tight if there's injuries. I see this as an average team. I think Woj gets 7-6. I think he gets in the playoffs. I don't see him getting far. Maybe he can pull some magic off like he did last year to get to the championship, but that's about it. I don't see him going too deep. So James, I was going to allow you to. Want to talk a second about your team and the strategy you went about with in the draft, because it was definitely a different type of strategy with the quarterback, tight end, wide receiver, wide receiver, wide receiver. Yeah, go ahead.
Going into the draft, I had a keen eye for one of the top, or a couple of the top 4 players that went, and unfortunately, they all went off the board. 3 of those guys: Mike Evans, Doug Martin, and Brandon Marshall. So at that point, I kind of figured I thought it would be better to go safe and go with somebody that could do it as a passer that was supposed to be trending more towards an upward direction. And I thought Aaron Rodgers would be the safest. If you look at other players on the board, obviously, one of the big questions could be, Cam Newton's on the board. Why don't you just take him? And it's like, well, you got a few different aspects. You got Benjamin coming back. You don't see Cam Newton running as much potentially because you have such a passing game available. So, there's some new pieces coming. There's some pieces coming back that wasn't on the NFC Championship team like last year. So, pretty much said to myself, it's probably, go with what you know. And, Aaron Rodgers has been consistent over the last 5, 6, 7 years. He had a down year last year, but the way things are trending, he definitely has a very good chance to improve on his numbers from last year, which, even though we're not the greatest for his career, still very good numbers. I mean, 287 points. That's, top 6, top 7 quarterback territory. Solid. I wasn't keen on Alshon Jeffrey just because of the offense. Mark Ingram being injury prone. T.Y. Hilton, not sure about, the passing game there. The only other person I was really considering at that point was Randall Cobb, but I felt like he was too early and he might have been able to fall back. So that's kind of where I was at with my first pick. Going into my second pick, I was just thinking, how can I have an edge on the rest of the league? Not that it was going to be the greatest thing in the world. I just figured Jordan Reed would make sense in that aspect, mainly because Jordan Reed last year finally got healthy. He showed what he's capable of doing. Odds are he's going to be Kirk Cousins' first or second top target, and arguably is one of the only people that could probably, odds are not, give Gronkowski a run for his money. And just how you said earlier, Mike, Rob Gronkowski, hands down the best tight end in fantasy football. So, and you got to hand it to Brendan. He had outstanding keepers, the number one wideout and the number one tight end. So, but then coming back around, I start seeing another quarterback go off the board after Eli Manning, Andrew Luck. I got the sense that quarterbacks are going. Let me do something that can kind of change the table a little bit. Maybe I got a little too quick with the pick, but I still think it's a solid pick because I can still use him in my flex. Greg Olsen. I feel like his stats can be comparable to a number 2 wideout in the league. He's not going to be the greatest PPR monster. He's not going to be a touchdown monster. But if you look at the rest of the tight ends, especially the ones on the board at that point, the only other tight end at that point that could really do something, in my opinion, would be Travis Kelce from Kansas City. But I just thought for flex position, he could be slightly better than most of the other wideouts on the board. Granted, it is a PPR format, so you could also consider Decker. I was actually hoping to target him coming back in the 6th round. But, that kind of explains my first 3 picks, my logic, process. I'm not saying that it's right. Fantasy football is fantasy football, but, I really liked my 3 picks there just because I felt like I really was getting good players that I felt comfortable with that could produce. But obviously at that point in the draft, no other tight ends were off the board or going off the board at that point. I could have made a run at, taking a chance at a CJ Anderson, Dante Moncrief. There were some other options on the board. I guess, thought at that point they were a little bit lower on my radar, maybe by like a round. So the timing of that as well really played a role in that. So that was kind of me not misinterpreting, but I guess sorry, I can't speak. I'm not a very good linguistic person, but I just felt, some of the other players I was targeting, I could have gotten them in the following round, but I underestimated that. That's the word I was looking for. So, before I continue, is there any?
What up? Good. Yeah.
Oh, there's Mike. So Mike.
Yeah, I'm here.
All right. Anything you want to say about my explanation for the thought process in the first 3 picks?
Well, I get the whole explanation for the first 3 picks. Sorry for a second here.
Not bad for a Saturday afternoon.
Sorry about that.
Hello.
Hello, Glenn.
Ah.
Sorry, I'm just trying to. Sorry, I'm trying to
I'm getting feedback from James's mic, so I'm muting him when he's not talking. No offense, James. So I did have two questions for James before I continue on. Are you worried at all about running backs? Because you waited ridiculously long to take a second running back. And the only other thing and this was a pick I brought up, I thought Sterling Shepard, you kind of reached for him a little bit. So just anything about those two guys. Yeah.
Like I said, I was looking for one of those PPR guys, and especially like an Eric Decker. I mean, he did wonders for me last year, even though he's underrated going into the season. But that Jets offense did great. But coming back around in the 6th round, 4 running backs that I was looking at were taken: Giovanni Bernard, Danny Woodhead, Ryan Matthews, and Arian Foster. Guys that I thought could be pretty good PPR guys. Not that I was down on Jeremy Hill, but Jeremy Hill just did not look... Not that he's not the starter, but I just feel like he's not as much of a PPR guy compared to Gio. Like, Jeremy Hill definitely looks like he can be a first or second down running back, and Gio is definitely passing down, third down backs. Obviously it's split 50-50 in Cincy, but each of them are, very unique and very useful to that offense in their own set of ways. With that said, and like I said, Foster was gone. I was hoping to pick him up. Obviously, that didn't work out. Melvin Gordon, I wasn't high on, and I didn't really think I should take him just because his first year he didn't look too great. Yes, he's looked better in preseason, but it's still preseason. I just felt like the jury was still out. Shepard I reached on a little bit. Just because I thought, all right, let me make sure, I get the PPR thing down. He's projected to be in the slot for the Giants. He's projected to be the number 2 wideout. Yeah, he's a rookie, but, Randy Moss was a rookie. Look at his first year. In no way I'm insinuating that, but I'm just saying, you never know with rookies. You never know with rookies. If they're in the right offense, you never know what they can do. And Glenn, if I recall, we had a bet about Kenny Britt and Hakeem Nicks a couple of yeyears ago, saying that I would bet they were 1,000-yard wideouts.
It's a couple more than a couple of years ago, but yeah, I remember that.
I'm just saying, not saying that they're going to break the bank and be the next Randy Moss. Obviously, Randy Moss was an anomaly. But as a 3rd wideout and 4th wideout with Kevin White, I thought,
there's upside.
There is upside for the most part. Kevin White, though, still very raw. If anything, I felt like Kevin White was more of a reach than Sterling Shepard, especially in a PPR format. But that's my explanation for those two things. The only other thing I'll mention is, and yes, I already know I had Aaron Rodgers as a quarterback, but I couldn't help but take Tom Brady in the 9th round because for a 12-team draft, I thought that was solid value. And compared to the value at running backs for the number 2, even though I needed it, I'm not saying I'm right or wrong in this, but I took value over running back. Not that it was necessarily the right choice or the best choice, I just went with where the most value could come from, and just seeing what happens. One other thing I'll add, and Mike, I didn't hear your projection for me for the season or what you liked and didn't like about my team. I'm sure there was more that you didn't like compared to what you liked. But I'm sure both Glenn and Mike can agree with me on this. Screwy things have happened in this league historically, and you never know what's going to happen. Like Glenn, I think one year went like 3-10 or like
4-9.
Yeah, and
Almost
you didn't.
broke the record for most points scored.
Yeah, you were one of the highest scoring teams. So,
Yep.
and you also have somebody that I think one year went like 5-8 or 6-7, didn't have any upside, and he won the whole league.
6-7, first year in the league.
Yeah, so you're like a child with a emotion disorder, and you don't know which way you're going. But well, you're taking shots at me. I'll throw one or two back at you. It's a good time. But my bottom line point is, yes, running back is extremely discouraging for me, but I definitely think I could have a shot at 6-6. And at the end of the day, screwy things have happened in this league. We never know what's going to happen.
Yeah, I get it. For Cliff Notes version, I didn't like your team, and I have you going 3-10. You can go back and watch. Yeah, I don't know if that how is that upsetting at all, or I think I still muted him. Yeah, I don't like James's team. Anybody who wants to know more can go back and see what I said earlier, but I'm not a fan. I think running back's going to kill you in the end. Since we have some people here, I'm going to jump in. I'm going to kind of fast forward over the last few teams. Basically, the top three teams I think in the league. I love my team. That's totally biased, and that's not objective whatsoever. I do like my team, but I think the team that's going to go all the way is you, Glenn, because I think you had an outstanding draft. Your
Thank
team looks solid across the board. I have you winning the whole thing. I mean, there's I don't think there's any other argument against your team. We can jump over to it. I didn't see any weak points. I feel like we were drafting off the same basic rankings because you were taking you were snatching guys that I had my eye on.
Right, vice versa.
Yeah. So, and I think our teams are kind of the teams to beat on paper. As you know, though, it's fantasy and stupid, weird stuff happens, and everything on paper. Just because you look good on paper doesn't mean shit once the actual games start. So I don't know. The only other team that I do like, Chris Birthright's team. I think he's going to win the South. I think a lot of that has to do with Beckham and Gurley. Having those two it makes it a lot easier. I didn't think he had the greatest draft, but he had a good enough draft. And the only other team I didn't touch on was Rob. I think he gets in as a wild card, but has a lot of holes still to fill. But looking at Glenn's team, I don't see any weak spots really across the board. I'm assuming you're satisfied with your team, Glenn.
Yeah, when Ingram fell to me at 7, I was like, that's it. I'm gonna have a great draft. So, yeah.
I wanted to say, I'll unmute James here so you can talk again. James, I wanted to ask you, do you agree with me with that statement about Glenn having the best team? You can go ahead, James. Do you agree with me with the statement of Glenn having the best team?
One concern. What?
No, it was just like a no shot.
My one concern with this team is I think his running back depth is a little sketchy. I think Theo Riddick is an okay PPR running back, but he's going to live and die by his receptions.
Yeah.
But other than that, I do agree. I think he definitely has the best team, and I think you're on point with Birthright, being up there to have a chance to challenge him.
What about me?
You're okay. But then again,
yeah.
3-10 marks, so.
Well,
I'm only,
don't take it personally.
No, I'm not. I know this is in good fun, so. But yeah, but as we've all been saying, it's fantasy. You never know what's going to happen.
Hold on a second. I was going to ask Glenn, outside of your team, who do you like best? Obviously not counting your guys.
Right. Well, your team, anytime you get to keep Julio Jones and A.J. Green, you already have a leg up on everyone.
Mm-hmm.
I think quarterback for you, I like the dice rolls with Tyrod Taylor and Kirk Cousins. And Anderson and Bernard at running back, I think that's solid. Yeah, Barnage, the out of nowhere guy. If you could do anything close to what he did last year, you're set there. But yeah, I think last time I mentioned also I loved Chris's keepers with Beckham and Gurley. I think he's set at number one running back, number one receiver all year. Mm-hmm. That's gonna be tough. He's gonna be a tough matchup every week.
Mm-hmm. And I think it helps with Birthright. Nobody else in his division really has that combination to compete with him, just the way the division's built. So I did mention, I'm going to post my predictions later. I did mention I have Glenn beating me in the championship. The wild card teams, I have Rob, Monique, Chris is a division winner is going to have to play through the wild card round. And I have Steve as the other wild card team. I did want to close out, wrap this up. I wanted to ask both of you. I guess we'll start with Glenn. Worst pick in the draft?
Sorry, James. Greg Olsen. I thought. It was good value, but I just think with your other team needs, it was a luxury pick.
So I still say Brendan with Tyler Eifert was worse. Only because I don't.
or Eli Manning.
Or and people were at the draft. We all knew Brendan was kind of just throwing names out there, and he probably, I predicted him to miss the playoffs. He's probably going to end up going 9-4 anyway, just because that's how it works out. But as much as Olsen's a luxury pick, Eifert, I think, was still worse than that.
Yeah.
Let me see if James back. James, what was your what do you think was the worst pick?
In my opinion, I would have to go Carlos Hyde with Woj in the first round. Just because, yes, Carlos Hyde is good, but that San Fran offense, that whole offense as a whole is scaring me a little bit. And plus, there's no guarantee Hyde is going to be healthy. I think the talent's there, but I don't think the production is there. And the other thing I would say is Rawls, I'm not sold on either. I'm not trying to beat up Woj right now. Love your Woj, I'm sorry. But, I just think that there were a little bit more certain running backs on the board at that point. That's all.
Yeah, well, he's starting D'Angelo Williams the first 3 weeks anyway, I
which I mean helps him. But I mean after the 3 weeks, I mean granted it's a little early, but that's just my input. That's all. But then again, who am I to talk? I mean, when did I running back? What?
James, who was your pick? Who do you think had the worst draft overall then?
Who do I think had the worst draft overall?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying mine's the worst, but it's not perfect. There's obvious. But if I was to pick one, I would lean between Woj and Brendan. And, like you said, Brendan was merely throwing names out there. And Woj, I think he could have made a little bit more bang for his buck on his first 2 or 3 picks. There's Greg in the background. Hi, Greg. Glenn says hi.
I can see that he said hi.
But... Sorry. I can't take the feedback when James isn't talking. So, Glenn, what do you think is the worst draft?
I'm looking at Brendan's team, and once you get past the starters, the bench is just awful. A backup kicker, a backup defense, 2 guys who are already out. I mean, I don't know.
I said exactly that, and the only reason I even have Brendan at 6 and 7 is because I'm thinking he's going to luck into some wins. I think.
Bullshit.
Yeah, that's the only reason. And I agree that I think Brendan's draft. I don't like James's strategy, but I think Brendan's draft. I feel like he prepared in the past couple of years, and this year he clearly didn't prepare at all. And it kind of I still can't get over Eli Manning being the 3rd quarterback off the board. I don't know how many other fantasy drafts this year you're going to see that. And Tyler Eifert shouldn't have gone. I don't even know how many rounds early he went. It's just too much. I'll let you guys. I'm actually going to wrap up. I've been on for over an hour now. But anything you want to add? Anything fantasy related, football related? Starting with you, Glenn.
Sam Bradford to the Vikings. I think it doesn't matter at all. It's Teddy Bridgewater wasn't going to do much, and now Bradford's not going to do much either. So, that's that.
James, anything from you to wrap up?
He is looking to get rid of a running back. No, but in all seriousness, I'm looking forward to this new waiver process. I think it's going to be a changer, and I think it's going to help and/or hurt a lot of teams. So we'll see what happens. But hey, it's hopefully it works out, and I feel strongly it will.
Yeah, I have a few things before we wrap up.
Okay.
Sorry, a second. For starters, I promised Larry I'd give a shout out to the stranger who watched our first webcast, and I can't remember the guy's name, but thank you for commenting, and maybe you'll watch some more this season. I don't know. That was just bizarre. Next week we start webcasts every Friday night at 9 o'clock. Mostly the weekly ones. We're just going to preview each of the matchups and go through waiver pickups, trades, whatever it may be. And people, you want to talk your opponent, that's the time and place to do it. Only other couple things. I finished the trophy is fully engraved up to 2015 now. So that's the good news. The engraving looks nice. The bad news is I lost one of the screws to one of the nameplates. So I think I'm going to have to go out and buy a new thing of screws. And
to touch on a couple serious things, I'm as far as the new waiver process, I'm waiting on the first person who bids $80 on some random wide receiver or defense, because it's going to happen. Somebody's going to bid, way too much money on somebody, and it's going to just completely mess up the whole process. And to finish, best of luck to everyone this season. I agree with you, Glenn. The Sam Bradford trade's the biggest nothing thing. It's not going to affect anybody's value, in my opinion. And I'm excited to see how the season turns out. I'm sure one of the teams I predicted to win like 2 to 5 games is going to end up winning the whole thing, just because that's the way fantasy works out. All right, so that's it for this episode. Thank you, James and Glenn, for joining in, and I'll see everybody next time.
Later.